This Advent, we are waiting, we are watching for that unlikely family of Jesus to make their way to Bethlehem, right? That's the star of the show. That's what we're imagining this month. That's where we're heading. But today, we read a story about another unlikely pair heading to Bethlehem as well. About 1,000 years before is when the story of Ruth takes place. Somewhere around or before 1000 BCE. And it reads kind of like a folk story, right? Pleasant and God is my king, move out, their sons frail and sickly die. If you keep reading the story, you'll find that there is another hero that comes in, Boaz, whose name means strength or stability. And we could keep going like that. There will be a baby born to Ruth in the end named Obed, servant. And I kind of love that. It reminds me of, in the last Harry Potter movie when they tell the story of the Deathly Hallows, and it's, anybody? Yeah, and it's like kind of a cartoon, and you can kind of find the meaning of the story. I love that it's told like a folk story. I don't know how much of this is historically accurate, but it doesn't matter because the point of the story is that we can find ourselves in it, right? We can find ourselves in this story about grief, about disrupted lives, about hardship, about family, and I'm betting everyone in the room has some stories about those things too. Yeah? Just me? Naomi shows us this tendency in our grief to isolate ourselves, right? She believes she is cursed. God has sent calamity upon her. She withdraws from those who she still has left. She renames herself. And I'm so glad that we have Amara in our church family because I think that's such a beautiful name to be able to come back to this story and remember this whole cycle. It's lovely. But she renames herself even. She believes she's cursed. She doesn't want to be called pleasant or pleasing. I know there are some women in the room who've gone through some things that maybe you were pleasant and pleasing before, and then you're kind of done with that after those experiences, yeah. Ruth, we see someone who could have gone back, who was just as alone, right? She could have gone back like Orpah did. And maybe she doesn't go back because she really loves Naomi, either romantically or platonically or in whatever way we want to imagine. Maybe she really did love Naomi and wanted to be with her. Or maybe what she was thinking was that going back home wasn't an option. Some of you have been there too, right? Maybe what was waiting for her back home was even scarier than the risk of the unknown she was stepping into. She steps into being a foreigner and a woman and a poor one at that, no male relatives. In the ancient world, this is like bad news. But this is where she heads. Maybe it's some combination of all of those things. But for whatever reason, Ruth, we see this dogged loyalty, right? And you've all heard part of this chapter before. Where? Where have you heard it? Your weddings, maybe, some of you? Yeah, weddings? Yeah, where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will become my people. Your God will be my God. This is a really classic wedding text, which is interesting. If you aren't up on your wedding text, but you're a Taylor Swift fan, there's also a reference to this verse in a Taylor Swift song, Lover. You know I can't go too long without some kind of reference. But even then, even with this dogged loyalty that Ruth shows, even with this huge shift in Ruth's life, Naomi, who is in the depths of her own grief and loneliness, can't quite receive that, right? She's still isolated. She'd rather be isolated. She tells her twice to leave. And we hear that it's only when she saw she was determined, she just kind of gave up. She said no more to her. She let her come along. They walk into Bethlehem together after a 50-mile journey, well, between 30 and 50, depending on which way they went. Anyway, they walk into Bethlehem together, and Naomi says, I'm all alone to her friends. She says, I left full and I've come back empty. God brought me back empty. This is the moment, even after Ruth has accompanied her this whole way, that Naomi says she's changing her name, right? Can imagine Ruth like, hello, I'm here. But when we are sometimes so deep in our own grief and isolation, people can't always get through to us, can they? Right? When we are deep in our grief and isolation, we need each other to keep showing up, to keep being there, to keep being doggedly persistent, even when we don't really want them to, even when it might feel easier to be on our own. Because the truth of this story anyway, is that our lives are better intertwined. Even if we can't feel it right away, don't give up on each other, right? Don't give up on yourself. Keep going. Ruth gives Naomi the grace and the space to be where she is, bitter, distraught, lonely, while still consistently showing up for her. What a gift, right? What a gift. No wonder her name means friend. And as the story keeps going, if you go home and read some more, you will see that Naomi does begin to open herself up more. She opens herself to Ruth, and together they create a whole new story, a whole new family that they could not have imagined before. Ruth, the Moabite, the foreigner, becomes the great-grandmother of King David, we find out. Ruth is listed in our Gospels as one of the ancestors of Jesus, who was born in that same little town that Ruth immigrated to, Bethlehem, 1,000 years later. The story of Ruth and Naomi shows us that there is room for your grief. There is room for your grief. And when you are in grief and in pain, it is not the end of your story. It's not the end. You may feel alone, but you are not alone. You may grieve the loss of a person, a community, some imagined future that you had in your mind, but a new picture can emerge. Different than your hopes, doesn't make the grief go away, but a new picture can emerge that is no less beautiful, no less meaningful. And I think that's the story that we all kind of live in our real lives, and we're still always surprised by it, right? 2 different surgeon generals in the U.S. have described what they call a loneliness epidemic in our country, in our nation, right? Everybody in this room, everybody is affected by loneliness in one way or another, right? If not now, at some other point, in all kinds of different ways, in different seasons of your lives. Kayla Craig writes that the antidote to loneliness is compassionate community. Compassionate community. And I think that's what we see happening in Ruth, right? They're not getting on the same team immediately and going out to change their story and fight the powers. They give each other the space to be where they are. They keep showing up for each other, each one in different ways at different times. They are a compassionate community. And this, I think, is a good model of what we're trying to build here. On Sundays here in worship, on Wednesdays when we invite in the campus community to eat and gather, on Thursdays when we feed lots of folks who are food insecure and housing insecure, we are building compassionate community, right? Not a team that everyone needs to get on, but a place where you can be where you are and find welcome. We're trying to build that here in this building throughout the week, and we're trying to build that in each of our hearts so that we can take it out as we go. So that we can take out that Ruth persistence of showing up to our neighbors, and that Naomi opening up little by little, changing our story in our neighborhoods too. Again, this is not perfect agreement that we're building. We are not building uniformity. We are not building some kind of exclusive club. We are building mutual care and openness and welcome and listening. We are building stick-to-itiveness with each other, right? In all of our difference. How many groups are you guys a part of that range in age as much as this Sunday morning crowd? Like, not a lot of opportunities for that, right? In location, y'all are coming from all over Central Texas and beyond. There are so many ways that we are different. There are so many quirks that we hold, different fears and different joys. We are unlikely as friends and family. We are unlikely as friends and family like Ruth and Naomi, like Mary and Joseph. And we are building this compassionate community bit by bit, little by little together, too. As we remember that road to Bethlehem that Ruth and Naomi traveled, and as we look forward to that road that Mary and Joseph are going to travel here in a little while, I want us to think a little bit about our own kind of metaphorical road to Bethlehem this holiday season. We know that the holiday season is hard for so many of us and for so many of those around us. And so I'm wondering if you can think of someone in your life that you can show up for, like Ruth did. Even if they can't really receive it, even if they can't give you anything back, who can you show up for to let them know you're not alone? You're not alone. You don't have to walk this alone. Think of somebody in your mind, somebody from work or from school or somebody in your family. You got somebody? Who are those who are grieving around you here, and how can you let them know that they're not alone? And then let's think about those who are farther away as well, right? Or who seem farther away. I am mindful of the actual roads to Bethlehem in the West Bank today and all of the suffering and violence that is happening there. It seems far away, and they feel very much alone. But everyone in this room is 2 degrees away from a family in the West Bank right now. I can tell you that, whether you know it or not. We've got folks who have families in the West Bank right now. I have a pastor friend who is in Bethlehem, who is a Lutheran pastor there now. It's not that far away. Is there something that you can do? Is there something that we can do to help them see they're not alone, even in the depths of their grief, even in the most terrifying and awful of circumstances? How can we show those who are far away, but not so far away, that they're not alone? We've all got our own loneliness that we're dealing with, and so did Ruth, right? When we want to be that doggedly persistent voice of togetherness like Ruth was, we can remember that Ruth was, she didn't have a lot to give, for one thing, right? And there's nobody in this story that's more alone than she is. Nobody. She ends up going where she knows no one. They go back to Naomi's hometown. And even in that, she is able to reach out to someone and let her know she's not alone. So we can too. We can too. But when we are also in our own grief, in our own loneliness, I wonder if there's something you can do to just open yourself a little. If you're not ready to be the Ruth chasing down the Naomi, can you be the Naomi who, even if you can't receive it totally, just begins to hear, begins to notice those who are showing up, those who are sitting around you right now? I wonder if there's one step that you can take to let someone else in and begin to write a new story, or even just open up to that possibility, yeah? Little bit by little bit. Can we do that? Yes? Okay. Beloveds, you are not alone. You're not alone. You are part of a long history of mourners, of wanderers, of outsiders, of unlikely friends, called God's people. You're not alone here. You're not alone in history. We've got friends and role models in our sacred scriptures as well. Today, may God give us the grace and the persistence and the openness to keep going together. Amen.